So in this demo, we're going to try something slightly different to what we do normally. We're going to answer an email that we received from one of our big banking clients because they asked us something which I thought would be of interest to others as well. And their use case was that they wanted to add a column, or they wanted some way to be able to delete any row in their grid using the adaptable blotter. But they didn't want to just delete any row. They wanted to be able to decide, depending on the contents of that row, whether it should be deleted or not. And he also wanted to make some options more visibly appealing than others. And he asked us how they could use the adaptable blotter to do that and how many days it would take. And the answer is you can use the adaptable blotter, and it's not a question of days, not even a question of hours. You can do it in just a few minutes, which is why I thought we'd use this demo, because it's quite an interesting use case of just how much hidden power is included in the adaptable blotter. So in order to do this, the primary thing we need is what's called an action column, which we'll look at in some detail. You can see it here. If you go into our very detailed API, if you go to our predefined config action column state, you can see all about it. And we're going to create this thing here called an action column, which we'll look at in a second. So at the moment, what we've got here is a AG grid, the most powerful of all the HTML5 vendor grids on the market. A fantastic product. And we've got the typical adaptable blotter additions to it, the tool panel, our toolbars, and obviously all our functions. So first thing we need to do then is create this action column. So let's have a look at our code. And in the code, all we've got here is, as you've seen, we create an AG grid instance. We pass in some random trade data. We then create the AG grid options object. We create our adaptable blotter options object with a few basic properties, one of which is the AG grid options. And another one is our predefined configuration. That's what you can see down here. At the moment, there's not a lot to it, just a few toolbars, but you can add to it. And then you pass in that blotter options into the adaptable blotter. So that's all you need to do. Number one, create AG grid. Number two, create your adaptable blotter options. Number three, pass that into the blotter. And there you are. That's what you see. So let's now start by creating the action column itself. Oops, not a good start. So action column, and that just has a single property called action columns. And we're just going to create one for now. If you want to see what it involves, as I say, you can see it here. It's got a column ID, button text, and a few render functions that we'll look at. So let's start with the column ID. Oh, actually, no, we won't. Let's need to create one of these first, don't we? And we'll call this delete. And then we'll create the button text and we'll say delete row. So there we are. That just creates your action column. This is using hot compiling, so that's compiled. If we go back to the grid, it will be there. We can't see it at the moment because it's a special column, but you can see it's here. So let's add it to the grid. And in fact, let's make a couple of other changes. Let's put currency here. And in order to make things a bit easier to see, let's take out all these columns that we don't need. In fact, let's create a layout, so that should make life a bit easier for us. So we'll create a new layout based on the current layout. We'll call it demo layout. Finish. There we are. If you've not seen layouts before, you can have as many of these as you want. That's your initial thing with all our columns. And then here's a layout we've just created. Let's put this here. And there's our action column. Nice and easy. So I've got my action column. I say delete row, and when I click on a button, well, obviously nothing happens at the moment because we're not wired anything up. So that's what we need to do next. We need to decide how do we delete a row. So to do that, first of all, we need to listen to an event. The adaptable blotter has lots of events. Again, let's have a quick look at them. You can see them here in our event API, part of the blotter API. And we're going to be listening to this one, the action column clicked event, which, as it says, is fired when a button in an action column has been clicked. So if we go back to our code, let's do adaptable blotter.api.event API on, and there's our event. And now we need the args, and you can see it says what the args are. So actually, let's put these like this. So you've got the args, and they're action column clicked event args, action column clicked event dogs. There they are. Let's import that. And now obviously we need to do something. We need to what happens when it's clicked. So let's delete the row, as we've said. So in order to do that, we use another part of our API. This time we use the grid API. In fact, it's the first one here. Delete grid data, and that takes a row. How do we know the row? Well, that's going to be in our args. Now these args use the FD3 schema, so you have to do data.0.id, and then you get the args. You get the name of the column, you get the primary key value if you need it, and then you get the row data. This is what we want because we're actually just going to delete that whole row. So we create that, we save it, go back to the grid, click on a row, oh, and nothing happens. Let's take a look why. Let's go to the console. Oh, here we are. Item passed to our function on array. So we've the ever handling in our API has dealt with that, and it's pointed out to us actually this needs to be an array. Yeah, delete data should be an array. So let's stick that in an array. Nice small change. Come back here. Wait for the page to hot reload. And now you can see we're able to delete row 3, row 4. So that's the first thing they wanted to do. So number one, we've now created a button which allows us to delete a row using the event API to listen to the event, and then the grid API to delete the row. But if you remember, the next part of it was they said they only wanted to have this thing appear depending on certain criteria. So let's mimic that ourselves. So let's say, for instance, we'll decide that we're only going to delete a row if the trade date's in the past, i.e. if the trade date hasn't yet happened, then obviously you shouldn't be allowed to delete it. So how would we do that? So let's go back to our code. And in the action column, there's a couple of functions you can provide. And one of them is the should render predicate. That, as it sounds like, is a predicate. And that takes params of application. What is it? Action column render params. And again, let's add this. If you want to see what the params are, you can see the params basically take a column, they take row data, and they can take a row node if you want it as well. So we should return, and we say we're only going to return if the params dot row data dot, we said trade date, didn't we, is less than the date now. So there's our render predicate. If we go now back into the blotter, once it reloads, there we are, it's already done it. It's only showing me when the trade date is in the past. Again, I can delete these, but obviously there's nothing I can do for those. And the third thing they asked was to be able to kind of make this look a bit nicer. So they wanted to be able to render it in a kind of striking way. So again, that's absolutely possible through the Adaptable Blotter. And you just use a different function. Instead of the should render, we have a render function. Again, it's exactly the same. It uses the same params. So it's the action column render params. And first thing we will do is let's keep it simple for the moment. So let's just return our own button. So we're going to return a button called delete trade. So you can see it's different to this one. And in fact, we don't need this anymore. So that then, there we are. It's now called delete trade. It's our own button. And obviously now we can style it as well. So we could say style equals color. What is it? Color equals red. Color equals red. And I don't know. Say font weight bold. yeah, obviously you're more likely to want to style it in kind of better ways than that, and you want to more likely to possibly even use your own CSS. That's all possible. But there we are. We've now rendered it how we wanted. And in fact, the very, very last thing they said, that they wanted to only render it, they wanted to render different ways depending on different things. So this is a slightly weird use case now, but let's imagine we said if it's, say, currency USD, we want it to look different to if it's any other currency. So we've got most of that now. We just need to make a small change to this function. So now we will decide what we will return. So we will say return, and we will say exactly the same thing. If the params row data currency equals USD, then let's return that. Otherwise, return that, and let's make them different. So what we've said here is we've said when we render it, we said if the currency is USD, we'll keep it as red. Otherwise, we'll make it blue. Go back to our thing, and there we are. It's hot reloaded. It's red where it's USD. So there we are. They're the three things that we had to do. Number one, we created a simple action column called delete, and we listened to the on action column clicked event in the API, and we then used the grid API delete grid data event method to be able to delete that row. And obviously it's your responsibility when a row gets deleted from the grid to listen to it and make any changes, in your back downstream systems, etc., etc. If you wanted to, you could obviously fire your own event here to say, should delete blah blah blah. So that does the basic deletion, and then we've just added two more functions, one of which decides whether the thing should render or not, so that it only renders under certain circumstances, in this case where the trade date is in the past. And the second function provides our own rendering, so instead of just having a button with the text that we initially provided, we now return our own rendering, and obviously this can be as complicated as you want, and because we have these params, we can have as many different renderings as we need depending on however we want it to work. So there we are. That's our action column, and because it's a part of our state, it's there. Whenever I refresh my grid, it reruns, it knows what my layout is, and it's able to reproduce everything. So something that's taken just a few minutes, but yet incredibly powerful, and all using an existing API and the existing functionality of the Adaptable Blotter. Thanks for watching, and as always, any questions, please do get in touch.